Well, the rain is right on time. It's, I love living in Oregon. I grew up in Salem, so I'm quite fond of the rain. I know that's not true of everyone that grows up in Oregon, but I oftentimes feel like I'm, what are those things that live on land and water? Amphibians? It's a little bit amphibious, an amphibious spirit. And we just passed the equinox on Friday. And so it is now time for us to turn towards the darkness and towards rain. And if you're moss, then this is good news for you. So I've kind of embraced the mossy part of your heart. So many years ago, we held a ceremony on the equinox, or centered around the equinox, and we let that slip at some point. It was a very simple ceremony, more simple than what we'll do today, but we were doing that on a regular basis. And then a couple of months ago, the Eco-Dharma group asked me if I would come and meet with them and talk a little bit about how we could incorporate more of a vision of what it means to be beings here on Earth into what it is that we do at Buddha Eye Temple, particularly into assemblies. And the Eco-Dharma group was very generous in recognizing that we already do a lot. There's a lot of talk about what it means to be a human at this time in this place with the generosity that we receive from the material and spiritual worlds. But there was this request to make something a little more explicit. What could we bring from maybe parts of our tradition which are acknowledged here at Buddha Eye Temple but aren't brought forward all the time? And so we talked about many different things. And one of the things we talked about was, well, let's start celebrating the equinox again. And let's start talking about the cyclical movements of our embodied existence here on this planet, in the same way that we bring in a recognition of the cyclical celebrations of the Buddha's awakening, birth, and those kinds of things. So that's what got it on the calendar. And then on Friday, I was like, hey, we got to do this thing on Sunday. And so I went back and looked at what we had done before and looked in the ritual manuals. I don't know if you all know this, but there are manuals of ritual that date back into antiquity. It's really fun, actually. You find something in a ritual manual and you don't know where it started usually, and then there's ways that you can investigate that if you speak Japanese or read Japanese. And then you can look back into what are the origins of these various rituals. And so I was doing some of that work on Friday and really appreciating the way in which our particular tradition, Soto Zen, has always been mindful of the seasons. If we go back to Keizan Zenji, Dogen Zenji was the kind of main founder of our school in Japan, and 4 generations down from him, there was a teacher named Keizan Zenji. Oftentimes Dogen is referred to as the father of Soto Zen, and Keizan is referred to as the mother of Soto Zen. He was a deep nurturer of the school and made it viable to last a long time. Dogen was kind of like the crusty guy on the mountain. He was like, rah. And Keizan was the kind of like embrace of everything, and he really promoted a very broad vision of Soto Zen. So we have records of Keizan Zenji's instructions for how to run a temple. Guess how they're organized? It's all seasonal. Yeah. What happens in the winter? What happens in the spring? What happens in the summer? What happens in the fall? And at that time, people used a lunar calendar, so everything is written in a lunar calendar, which I always fantasize a little bit about going back to the lunar calendar. And then I think like, man, people can't make appointments with the solar calendar. With the lunar calendar we're going to have to make some other shifts to make the lunar calendar work too. Unless you just have the lunar phone app, I guess. Probably your phone's telling you what to do all the time anyway. So this is very consistent with our tradition, and I'm happy that today we're able to reinvigorate this practice, and I see it as an opening of exploration into another layer or level of what it is that we're doing as a community and as a temple, and thinking about our place. So many of you know that I had the great good fortune to visit Peru this summer, and I was there for the 120th anniversary of Soto Zen in South America. We had the 100th anniversary of Soto Zen in North America this spring. It was supposed to happen last year, but with COVID complications, things got pushed back a little bit. So last year was the 100th anniversary of the founding of Zenshuji Temple, which is in Los Angeles, which was the first officially recognized Soto Zen temple in North America. And it was built by the Japanese community there, Japanese American community, and has been cared for those 100 years. A real beacon of our tradition in North America. And people are oftentimes surprised to find out that South America is longer. Why? Because North Americans are arrogant. That's the explanation. We think, well, of course we would be older, we would be first here. Actually, immigration to South America happened earlier than it did to North America from Japan. Very strong communities of Japanese people immigrated, and there's vibrant Japanese South American communities and temples that were founded there. So 120th anniversary. So it was really wonderful to be there. Today we'll offer a little chip incense. Many of you have done that before. Guess what the chip incense is in Peru? It's not sandalwood. Exactly. Yeah. It's this fragrant wood that they use in Latin America for different ceremonies. They have it chipped up. That was really a nice fusion of two cultures that was there. While I was there, I was traveling with a student. Her name is Enyu. Many of you know her. Her birth name is Arli, or I prefer to call her Areli, which is maybe a little closer to the pronunciation in Spanish. And she's part of a movement in Peru to remember and to reimagine and reinvigorate the ancestral ways of the people of the Andes. And so it was really wonderful to travel with her, because everywhere we went and the people that we met were all part of this process of remembering. And that's the way they talked about it. They said that there's something that we need to remember. It's not something we need to figure out. It's not something we need to find. It's not something we need to claim. It's not something we need to change. It's not something that we need to break our way into or break other people into. Simply, it's something that we have to remember. It's right here. It's so intimate that we look over top of it constantly. And that is the practice that they emphasized. Everything that they were doing in the various ceremonies that we went to and different people we went to talk to, that was always the theme. How do we remember? This was here. The Spanish came. They destroyed many, many things. And yet this is still here. And we are also Spanish. And we're also Peruvian. We're all of these things. Not a lot of anger driving this movement. It's more like the recognition of the necessity for humanity to remember these ways if we are to make our way to the next part of what it means to be human. And so there were three things that they emphasized over and over again, which really stuck with me. The first is respect. And I love this when Enyu would talk about this. She was like, this is just obvious. She wouldn't say anything more about it. She's like, this is just the door that should be so obvious to everyone that I don't even have anything to say, that we should respect. The second is reciprocity, that if we really want to activate, if we really want to embody respect, that it has to be a deep acknowledgement of our reciprocity with all beings. And when I say all beings here, this was very true in the Peruvian Andean culture and is very true in Buddhism. It doesn't mean people. It's really important that personhood is not defined by humanness. That personhood is something which is there really in all things. All things are persons. And now linguistically we have to kind of readjust to that a little bit, right? We're used to saying person and we think a human being. But in this way of thinking, that all persons right? Which means all things. We use the word things, right? All persons need to be within the network of reciprocity. To be a person means to be in a network of reciprocity. To live in harmony with that network is our spiritual life. So those two I got right away. I was like, yeah, this is like just Buddhism, Andean Buddhism. Right? And then in the third one, which is also Buddhism, but something which I think we can really learn from our Latin American brothers and sisters. The third one is gentle care. If we understand respect and we understand reciprocity, the way that we will be with persons, with people, not human people, all people, including human people, will be this gentle kindness, a gentle care. How easily we forget that. I was out for dinner on Friday. Joichi was here for just 10 hours. He was back from Japan. He went to visit his father. He'll be back next week for a few weeks before he goes to the monastery. So we went out and had a little pizza, and I was waiting in the line for a long time. I was so upset. I kept my cool. I'm good at that, I was just joking and having a good time. But one of the things I'm so aware of in that situation is how easily gentle care disappears. I'm not getting what I want when I want. This isn't the right way for this to work. It's not efficient. The owner's sitting right there. Why aren't they doing something about it? This should work. My Dutch roots got really going, and I was like, I could organize this for you. Much better way to do this. Anyway, it goes away like that. And our level of entitlement is also our level of isolation. Okay? They are just the exact same thing. Entitlement and isolation. What do we do about that? Well, this is another question. But one of the things is to work on this in a deeply spiritual way. We know that there needs to be gentle care for the earth. And for many of us, earth means the material. And that's true. These days, it's very common to hear the phrase Mother Earth. And we think about Mother Earth, we think of the embrace of the material world. I want to add something to that this morning, though, is that the earth is not just the material in the way that you have been trained to think of the material. You have been trained to think of the material as a physicality which is simply physical. That it's made up of atoms that are made up of other little physical things. And people always get really they're like, yeah, but there's so much space in between the electron and the neutron. And I always think, no, it's not space. It's breath. It's spirit. But we've organized our minds in a materialist society to think of the earth simply in material form. Even when we think about the big challenges of our life in terms of the current situation with global warming, for example, we almost always talk about it simply in a material way. And I don't know if you've noticed, but your deep well of grief, which if you don't think you have one, you're just not looking close enough. The grief about what humanity is doing and the way that we're out of harmony with this material world is all about spirit. It's not just about material. So when we say earth, we don't just mean that kind of idea of a physical reality which is reducible to a kind of a, where do they do experiments?
Laboratory.
Yeah, kind of a laboratory situation where you're trying to isolate and define the materiality of the thing. That the interconnection of all things, the reciprocity, the networks of reciprocity are mysterious and beyond our ability to be able to grasp. Even very hardcore material scientists will point that out. It's slippery if you look close enough. In actuality, the material and the spiritual are never split. They can't be. They aren't a separate thing. But again, we forget. We forget very easily, and we take just the side of the material. And we hope that it will continue to nourish us as it has for hundreds of thousands, millions of years. Now, the path of the Buddha is a path of together with. When the Buddha was awakened underneath the Bodhi tree, and upon seeing the morning star, he said, I, the great earth, and all beings, it's really important. I, the great earth, and all beings, awaken at the same time. Or attain to the way at the same time is a stricter translation. That was his exclamation. It wasn't, oh, I remembered, I'm Buddha. All you guys are screwed up, but I'm Buddha. That wasn't what the Buddha woke up to. The Buddha woke up to the wholeness of being, in which he is both an integral part of, or an integral instance of that wholeness, but that everything is involved. That the body of awakening is not definable to a human being. The body of the Buddha is the great earth itself. In fact, when Mara, the sower of ignorance, challenged the Buddha further, when the Buddha sat underneath the Bodhi tree, Mara showed up with armies of all different various kinds of weapons and afflictions to try to knock Buddha off of his seat, basically. But he couldn't do it with all of the power. Mara, people think Mara is like Satan, but it's a little different. Actually, Mara is just a god, but he's the god of the world of samsara, the cyclical world of ignorance. And so he gets a little bit bent out of shape when there's someone who's going to overturn the apple cart, is going to make it so the cyclical samsaric world doesn't work anymore. So he's very threatened by the Buddha. Right? So he uses all the power of the samsaric world to try to get the Buddha from waking up. But none of the power can do that. And so he uses this last trick, this last power, which is a power of the heart, which is to ask someone, who are you to be awakened? Now think about your own life, even when you're really confident about something you're doing, if someone calls it into question in that way, who do you think you are? That's the biggest power move. The storms and the showers of knives and the fire and all these other things that Mara sent those were good attacks, would blow all of us over. But this one, I feel like, is really the key one. It's the attack that we're all facing all the time. Well, not me. I'm just me. I'm just this isolated, tiny being in a massive cosmos. What could I do? How could it be about me? How could I remember the proper relationship, the proper respect, the proper reciprocity, the proper care? How could that be me? I'm so fallible. But the Buddha didn't answer Mara. He didn't take the bait. You'll see this oftentimes in statues of the Buddha or paintings of the Buddha. He exhibited what's called the earth-touching mudra. He just touched the ground like this. With his finger. He touched the ground like this. And in some stories it says that the earth spirit emerged from the ground and did a wonderful dance to celebrate the awakening of the Buddha. And in other versions of the story, there is just the chorus of all persons testifying to the awakening of the Buddha. Because the Buddha awakened with all beings, because the Buddha knew that it was awakening with and of all beings immediately respond. to that question of who are you? Who are you to repair our broken relationship with the earth? Stop being so isolated. Stop thinking it's going to be you that does it. Right? There's something else necessary. We have to remember we're not independent, but we also have to remember our appetites. We're in a funny time now where we're just keeping up the binge eating while we're telling ourselves that we need to do something about repairing our relationship with the earth. If you are in this room, you're doing that. I just guarantee you. There's no way to be in this cultural context without being gorging like that. So I'm not trying to pick any individual out as being at fault here. We all are. But one of the things that happens when we realize that is we think, well, I have to change the way I live. And then the level of the way that we're able or willing to change is a pretty small shift on the dial. And that might be what we need to do. I'm not going to comment on that. But I would say that oftentimes we just aim at our appetites as being wrong or bad. And we don't really leverage the power to change there. Our appetites are absolutely necessary. To be a person is to eat and to be eaten. We prefer the first part more than the second part. And that, therein lies the problem, right? Top of the food chain. And so we just exercise whatever it is that we want to do. And so in this spiritual work, where we're practicing to remember something, we do remember our needs. We remember what is necessary for a person's life to unfold. And the reason that that's important is because it leads us into caring for the support that we receive. Rather than just saying, gosh, I need to consume less, I need to consume less, I need to consume less, we can turn our perspective and we can say, how do I start appreciating what it is that I do consume? And that has an equal measure of importance, rather than just always focused on the kind of reduction side. Is reduction necessary? I believe absolutely. But how are we going to get there? So we have a couple ways within our tradition that I think can be helpful here. One of them is to venerate the spirits. And I said that there's no such thing as earth without spirit. The two are always together. And so it's a very simple thing, a straightforward thing, but again, we forget to do it, to make an offering and to say thank you. And please continue to help and support me. Did you guys read all the upheaval about the Pachamama ceremonies at the Vatican? Okay. Kind of out of left field there. I realize that. So Pachamama is the way in Latin America that Mother Earth is referred to, Pachamama. And so Pope Francis had arranged for there to be a ceremony at the Vatican in which Pachamama was venerated, and it really made a lot of people angry. So anyway, if you like that kind of debate, you can go on YouTube. There's endless places. But the reason that I bring it up is because I would venture that many of us, if not most of us, if we've grown up in a spiritual tradition, the spiritual tradition feared the earth spirits. That the earth spirits were seen as something which was a problem to be overcome. That they were going to hook you to this material world, and the material world is just fallen, basically. I'm not only talking about Christianity, I'm talking about, I would say, many, many religions, if not most large religions. There is a drive towards spirit that wants to leave the earth behind. There are some forms of Buddhism that are like this, but that is not our tradition. That the care for, the veneration of, and the asking for nourishment and protection from the earth spirits is really central. And so there's two icons which we will use in our ritual this morning, and I want to tell you a little bit about them, and then I'll talk about the ritual and we'll enact that. The first one is an icon which many of you seen. I think it's been here in the hall for how many months now, Shanae? When did we put it up? Was it the spring time? Maybe.
Sounds good.
Yeah. On the Buddha's left here, you can see that the nook on the wall there is empty right now. And that icon, from your seats you won't be able to see it, but you'll be able to see it in a little bit here, is an image of a white serpent. And this was this is a very important earth spirit of our particular school. Is referred to as Shiro Daigen Shuri Bosatsu. Or sometimes just Daigen Shuri Bosatsu. Daigen Shuri Bosatsu is a bodhisattva, but is an earth spirit that is a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva because this earth spirit pledged itself to protect the Dharma, and particularly to protect Dogen Zenji and Dogen Zenji's heirs. So there was a famous story when Dogen came across this earth spirit that was in the form of a human person. And the Daigen Shuri Bosatsu said, well, I'm an earth spirit. And Dogen was like, yeah, really? And so Daigen Shuri Bosatsu transformed into this white serpent and then went into Dogen Zenji's bag and traveled with him and protected him on the way. Helped him to copy a very important koan collection the night before he left China to return to Japan. And so in Soto Zen temples in Japan, from the time of Dogen in the 1200s down to today, every Soto Zen temple has an image of Daigen Shuri Bosatsu. Almost always looks like a Chinese kind of court person with his hand over his eyes like this. That's the normal one that you'll see. And that comes from, this earth spirit had traveled from India, was said to be the seventh son of King Ashoka, who was a very famous king in India, who was the big promoter of Buddhism. And his seventh son became this spirit that dedicated itself to protecting the Dharma. And at one point traveled to China, to this mountain that is very close to the ocean. And it's said that it would look out, that Daigen Shuri Bosatsu, Shiro Daigen Shuri Bosatsu, would look out for the ships that were coming and going and taking care of all the people that were traveling in that area. So he's got his hand over his eyes like this, looking out here. But I much prefer the white serpent. And this is the way that Daigen Shuri Bosatsu was very intimate with Dogen and stayed very close to him. Also sometimes is like a symbol of Dogen himself. Sometimes shows up in that way. So this icon was crafted by our very own Shanae, who's a wonderful painter, and I asked her if she would make this painting a couple years ago, and then she did, and so I wonder if you'd just be willing to say a couple things about it. I know it's not your favorite thing.
This never works. Well, anyway, I wanted to thank you first for welcoming me in a capacity that I truly can serve you by doing some of the things I've been doing and making the icon. There are a few things that a lot of the imagery that I use in my poems and my paintings don't always coincide with Buddhist iconography, but I tried with this and a Prajnaparamita that I made for Dhamma and an image I'm working on for a Sangha member to be closer to the iconography so that you can participate and recognize it. and you're not thinking about, what's this, and some crazy artist, and you know what I mean, or about me, so that was important. The thing I'd like to say about images in terms of protection, the protection, and this has always been for me, even before I practiced, is that making sure that any kind of practice or my conduct as a human being in the world, what I'm learning, through my life and through, being in the world is true, and that's the only way I feel, that's just my idea, that protection is valid, and also that images are spontaneous. They're not mental. The arts, and especially the visual arts or music, are not about words, and even poetry, is really not so much about words in the way that we usually think about it. So the imagery, rises, spontaneous, and it, it's just in the being with it. So it's not like the serpent means this and okay, it's more how it rises up, and the meaning is found through my working with it and living with it, and the day-to-day, being with all things that it feels true and real, and also that it coincides with how I am, as a being in the world. And I don't know, I have a few pictures that I brought. I actually brought them for me to remember while I didn't know I was going to have to do this. So I think I'm doing pretty good. So, I have images here. If you would like to see them later, or that I made as some prep, and so that Abbot Ejo would have a choice. And also to say that images are spontaneous, and they arise for all of us in many ways, in different ways. And the beginning of traditions, are all this more folk, more from the people, rather than, as already prepared, this is a dragon, this is a serpent, this is this, this is that. And that's important for us to know, that we all participate in images or sounds or gestures, that, how we can incorporate them into our lives, can be different. You don't have to just be a visual artist, but, this folk art, or that springs up from the well of archetypes or memory or dreams, is available to all of us. So.
Thank you. So this morning, there will be the official empowerment of this icon. So within our tradition, when you have an icon that you're going to then relate to and do venerative practices with, we have been doing that for a while now, but there's a special ceremony, which is sometimes called an eye-opening ceremony, or a dotting the eyes ceremony. And so we'll perform that for the Daigen Shuri Bosatsu this morning. And then everyone will have a chance to make offerings. So within the hall, that earth spirit that is the most prominent is always here to the Buddha's left. We're in a process of starting to plan for the building of a spirit's altar in the yard, which will be underneath the fig tree, with a stone and an altar placed there. So next equinox, or if we have other earth spirit ceremonies, we will go out there for part of it. And if it's raining, we will have umbrellas, which is likely to be. We're in Oregon. But I created a ihai, which is a kind of a placard, which will be associated with that altar out there, but will also be kept in the hall. So for kind of daily things, things can happen there as well. And that is some ancient Chinese characters. Chinese characters are really wonderful for a whole bunch of reasons. But one of the reasons is the way they came about. In ancient times, before there was a writing system, the oracles, or you could say kind of shamans, they would heat bones or shells like of tortoises, and they will crack, and then they would read the cracks. And those cracks then started to develop into a way to record things. And then that over time developed into a written language and then became more and more practical. But it has its origins in something, this kind of mysterious thing about images. Do we make them, or are they there? And this has a lot to do with the world of the spirit. So I quite like those old style characters. And I have these big thick dictionaries where you can go and look up the old characters, and then I try to write them. I don't know how well I do it, but it's good fun. And it evokes something that's a little bit different than the typical kind of writing that you see, the kind of beautiful calligraphy that we have. Like on the, here to the Buddha's right, there's a wooden plaque there. That style is much more celebrating the brush. And this style is a little more like, supposed to be like cracks in a shell or something like that. So that plaque says earth spirits. So there's two characters for earth that are on the top, and then the last one means spirit or deva or deity. It gets translated in different ways. So there'll also be an empowerment for that placard. In the ceremony, it's not too complicated. I'll stop jabbering here in a minute. I'll go and change robes. There'll be some bells and things. That's a good time to run to the restroom or something if you need to. And then there'll be a kind of normal entrance, incense offerings, chanting of the Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom Sutra, just like we normally do on Sunday morning. And then the ryoban, people sitting right here, will all turn like we do for segaki. So let's be turning of the ryoban. And then we'll face this direction. This is really important in the rituals that we do here at the temple, that there's a mirror between this world of the Buddha's awakening and the whole earth, that those two are never separate from each other. And that's what we're doing here in this ritual space. Sometimes we face this way and we venerate the Buddha, we venerate awakening, and then sometimes we turn and then we venerate the world and see the awakened nature of the earth. And so that happens in this direction. For that, there will be the chanting of the Daihi Shindarani, the Great Compassionate Heart Dharani, which we also chant on Sunday mornings always, so it's in the book there. And then there's a very short chant that is called the Emme Juku Kannongyo, which many of you know by heart, because that's the one we typically chant when we're making incense offerings. So that will happen. Those of you who know it, just chant with vigor. Those of you who don't, just start out like this. Blah, 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 blah. And then pretty soon it will start forming into the words. And you just stick with it. Because you'll need to be getting up and walking around and stuff. You won't be able to carry a book. So just stay with it. That time, then we'll have the whole assembly come forward and make incense offerings here to the spirit's altar, and then sit back down, and then we'll have a closing. And then afterward, there's a special treat, which I'll let Jacqueline tell you about after we chant and whatnot. So I guess the last thing I would say is that these cycles, I think, are really fundamental to the remembering that we need to do. And so if you're not in the habit of doing it, take a look at your calendar. It probably says things like equinox. Probably says things like solstice. Probably says first day of spring, or those kinds of things. Start to pay attention to that. And in your embodied life, spiritually embodied, physically embodied, ask yourself, what does that mean? Why does it make a difference if I notice that or don't notice it?